So in the last video, we came up with this neck. In this video, I want to go through making smooth, ergonomic surfaces for the neck, adding in frets, and adding in some other important details. Let's start by going to the fillet feature. And if I fillet this top edge with an 1/8 inch radius, that seems to go in no problem. But if I try to add a fillet here, we get too complex for capping, right? So we're going to get rid of that fillet and let's try to add one in a different way. I appear that the capping issue happens because we have some convergent edges in here, and we can easily clear that out. Maybe I'll select this whole edge so that there's no question as to how I want this fillet to go through. And then similarly, I can highlight some of the edges up here and do the same thing. We'll send this fillet down this edge and apply. And that kind of fixes that too complex for capping issue. And if I look a little bit closer, our edges are indeed smooth, which is quite bolstering. So we've at least smoothed out the top. You know what, let's also smooth out this bottom here. You can see that goes around pretty nicely. So we're able to smooth out the bottom there. Everything else, apart from maybe right here, should be smooth. And we did have an interference issue on this edge right here with the mating component, so I might want to move that up. Maybe not that far, of course, but 0.225 ought to be fine. So we'll close that. And I think this could be a neck without sharp edges. That's pretty cool. Next, we'll want to add in frets. And frets can be tricky, but there's a good source, right? Stumac.com has a fret position calculator. And let's say that I enter in 24 frets and the unusually long length, scale length of 27, and the scale length is from the nut to the bridge, the total length of the string. And this would be the dimensions for that specific configuration. So depending on where you place your bridge dimensionally, you can actually scale each fret to be whatever you want. It does work in millimeters or in inches. I work on both units in this channel, so I'm doing inches on this one. Let's actually add some frets, and to start adding frets, we need to add a nut. So I'm going to go to my view and toggle my planes here. I may need to toggle my sketches at some point as well. I'll highlight this nice center plane. We'll activate a 2D sketch on it. And let's make a line, and then I'm going to go with an arc and then another line, right? So I have to dimension the nut in a way that the bottom of the string on the nut clears the top of all the frets. And I don't know the ideal dimension for that, but I'm sure we can take an estimate here. Let's go with 0.7 perhaps, and then I'll add a vertical relation there. And while I have my vertical up, I can add that there, which looks like it's already fine. There we go. Now I want to make a dimension relative to this edge, maybe 0.25. So that's still a bit high. 0.15 maybe. And let's go here with 0.15 as well. And then of course you can see that this line here marks where the very top of my neck is. So this is the point that I would want the string to be on, right? The first free part of the string. So technically I ought to have this line lined up with this line here, so that I'll be able to properly dimension my neck. We'll reset my view. So we're going to go from here, and I'll hold shift and highlight here and add in a horizontal. And that means that the string is free to vibrate at this line and down. and that's where I want to start my dimensions and offset all my frets from. This seems like it's still a little bit of a large nut, so I'm going to say 0.075. Right, let's reduce that a little bit. And then it's a question of, well, how far do we want to move out? And now that I'm looking at this 0.7 dimension, it's a little bit large. So let's reduce that just so that we don't have an extrusion where that thing is hanging out the bottom. 0.02 is clearly not a good dimension. 0.1 is not good. 0.15 lines up perfectly. 0.175 goes down in a little bit, so I'll try that. And now we're going to go to an extrude. We'll say mid-plane. And if I visually drag this, that seems, well, that moved on me. That seems like a pretty good dimension. Right, so there's our nut. That's probably a bit tall to be realistic. But depending on how you cut in the grooves for the strings or other things, maybe you can make it work. Let's edit the sketch though, and I'm going to lower that a little bit further still. I think this also depends on what kind of strings you use too. So if I lower that down, let's try 85 thou there. Okay, so how do we make our frets? And there's a number of ways to do this. One, I can draw like a little circle. I think frets are probably a little bit more elliptical, but you could probably model them as perfect circles. And if I can make a sketch where I have a perfect circle every so distance, and I dimension them all in one sketch and do an extrude or a sweep across, right? Or I can model kind of one fret at a time using a pattern, but I'm going to go with a pattern on this one, and anyone is welcome to do whatever they feel is best for their design intent. So the YZ, let's activate a sketch on that, and of course let's do, and we really can do an ellipse if we want to. I think that's pretty cool, right? I think that's a little bit more advanced modeling. So if we go to dimension, we don't want it quite as elliptical, maybe 0.1 by 0.85, 0.085 is what I meant, 0.085, just a mild ellipse like that. And I think that fret is actually a bit large. Let's scale everything down by half, right? Divided by 2 and divided by 2. Now again, this point, this edge right here is what we want to dimension off of. And I can go to my calculator and say 1.515. And then I have the distance from fret to fret and also the distance from the nut, depending on how I want to constrain my sketches. So let's take care of this. 1.515, right? And then I can start to just repeat, and I'll add a coincident just to make sure that we're fully constrained here. So I could just sketch another ellipse or another circle or whatever I'm sketching, and another and another and another, and do this all in one. And that's a perfectly fine method. For me, I'm going to try something a little bit different. So I have my sketch 12 right here. We're going to go to extrude. It should extrude to the same length, and we're going to say mid-plane done, right? So the other method that I'm going to do is choose a linear pattern. And we're going to choose this feature here. We're going to choose our path right here. Or I should say our path would probably be better as an axis right there. So we're patterning down the y-axis. We want spacing to be 1.430. And of course, we'll edit that and we'll change direction. And I simply create a pattern for every fret. It's a little bit time consuming, but so is sketching everything out and adding dimensions for it. So I don't think there's a shortcut for frets like this. I'm going to keep on patterning one fret after the other to the dimensions that I wish. I will not make you sit through this, so I'll fast forward this and see you on the other end. And it looks like I actually mistakenly made this an inch short compared to the number of frets that I'd like to have on this. So let's deal with that. And it should be pretty easy to go back into history and make this a bit longer. So it looks like this plane is the plane that defines the length of my neck as far as the string is allowed to vibrate. So we're going to edit the position of this plane by, I'm going to add an inch. And because all of my frets are dimensioned relative to the nut, we should not have any dimensional issues with regard to the frets. It does look like that we've got a fillet problem here. How about I roll this back to where my fillet problem has occurred? Yeah, let's edit that. Right, so this is the problem that we're having with the fillet, and of course this goes back to how we've dimensioned our loft. So let's go back to this loft here. We have this sketch, and this sketch, and it looks like our other planes also need to be defined to be an inch longer, and that is where the problem has occurred. So I'm going to edit my plane, and we're going to say 23. And roll that forward. And it looks like that actually worked everything out. But this plane is a bit too close for comfort, so let's go ahead and edit this and add an inch on it. 31. Again, this goes back to design intent. At the time I thought it was a good idea to make sure that all my planes were relative to this one, but maybe the head planes had a better intent to be relative to one another. That's a pretty fine point and a rather unforeseen issue. But now you can see we've updated. Our fillets are fixed, so we didn't even have to redo a fillet. We just had to change a few dimensions. And it looks like we're back in business now. I can finish up my other two frets. I might want to make these wider. So there we have a fretboard. And this is one way of doing it with all the patterns. Now the advantage is, instead of a big messy sketch, I have just some feature patterns that fill up my tree, and I can edit them one at a time, and it's really simple compared to a sketch with a bunch of dimensions on it. The disadvantage is I have a little bit less control. You can see that my neck was made to taper down, and I have a gap here that's kind of large. But I come up here and my gap is very small, and that's because the frets remain the same size as I progress down the neck, which gets wider. So I'm going to actually demonstrate also a different way of doing it, right? We're going to do this in one big sketch. Again, I'll fast forward it because you're just going to be watching me get dimensions from the calculator that I've shown you how to do, so it's not really beneficial to learn. So I'm going to make this one big sketch, and let's do this all over again, but this time with a sketch instead of this, and I can show you a little bit about how I can alter the where the frets end. And actually I can show you pretty easily right now. I'll make a plane. Let's go with a 3-point plane, and I'll select vertexes for my model. I'll select vertex here, How about one here, so we get a nice kind of edge where the frets will be leaning in, kind of like on a real guitar. And then a vertex here. I'll apply that. And now you can see I have a plane that kind of moves angularly up and tapers with the neck because I chose the wider part here and the narrower part up here. So we'll close that. I'm actually going to delete all of my feature patterns. And now I'll go to my original extrude for the first fret here. We're going to edit that, and instead of mid-plane, let's go to geometry. Well, planes count as geometry. And of course, I have to cancel this, right? What I have to do is take this plane and roll it before my extrusion so that I'll be able to see the plane when I edit my extrusion. And we're going to say to geometry, this plane. That failed, of course, because let's select the right plane there. There we go. So my fret is going right up to the edge. It has the angle like we talked about with the angle on the plane, and that angle is adjustable, by the way. And let's now modify our sketch. Well, now it looks like I was right in the first place because it looks like we're about 1 inch too long. So that was a good exercise in being able to correct some things, but it also appeared to not be necessary. So I probably added an extra fret by mistake or something last time. That can happen. When we look at our frets, we can see we're spilling over the edge just a little bit in some places. So we could make some further adjustments if we wanted to. I would probably just make another plane and offset it a slight amount and extrude to the new plane a slightly less distance. For what I'm doing, I think I'm all right. Now, I'll grab my frets, and I really care about my extrusion here because we are extruding down the center plane. So it's pretty easy to do a mirror, and we'll mirror about our plane that runs through the middle. And there we have it. I can probably reduce my planes once more. So we'll edit the position of this. Going back down to 21, which I really thought was correct. We'll generate to our last feature. And then we'll take this plane, and you can see how it's affected our neck. So we definitely, or our head rather, we'll definitely want to take that back down to 22. Generate to last feature. And the last plane is fine, really, truly, it is. So I'll keep up with this method, right? So we've got a big long sketch. If I regenerate all, you can see it really doesn't take a long time to regenerate everything, so our sketch hasn't hurt us performance-wise too much. All right, next, let's make some holes for our tuners to go into. I want to sketch on this face, and this should be a lot easier than adding frets, actually. And I want to do a series of circles. It'll be a six string guitar, of course. So there's our 6 holes. Hopefully I can box select all of these and choose equal. Of course, I think since I have multiple equal relations in there, it doesn't quite let me, but there we go. Well, I want to draw lines between all of these, and I also can set these lines to be equal. And I can also set these to be parallel. I can establish a dimension. Perhaps I want these holes to be something like 0.375 and the standard distance between them to be something like 0.75, maybe a bit more. 1.25. Okay, that's a bit much. 1 maybe, that looks about right. Now if I try to drag this around, it should move as a uniform set of holes. So I'm going to add one more parallel, this edge with this line, and then I have 2 degrees of freedom here, and so I can establish a nice X and Y, perhaps my X 0.7, and my Y would be my height here, of course. 0.25 is fine. Yeah, that looks like a guitar. So we'll deactivate, we'll go with extrude cut, and we can afford through all. So we've got that worked out. Now I'll save my neck. Now with that saved, I can open up my assembly. And look how my assembly has updated. So that's really cool. We can even take more length off that neck or add another fret if we wanted to. I think that would be quite redundant. We'd have to redimension all of our frets, but we could do one of the two. I would be in for lowering the length of the neck again, because it looks like I need to forever change my neck length. But this is starting to come together as a good looking electric guitar. I think the last thing we want to do is make some holes in the neck for these bolts to fasten into. And you can, if you'd like, make some dimensions and measurements and just add 3 holes into this neck, or you can do an in-context edit. I think I've shown this before, but if I right click on my neck and choose edit here, now I can edit my neck as a part of the assembly, and this gives me a few advantages. I can create a sketch on my face, and now look at these holes from the body are selectable, and so I can choose project, I can choose my hole, and we'll maintain association. And if I were to change the holes on my body, the next time I open my assembly, the holes on the neck will automatically update, which I think is a super nice thing to do. Now I don't want to use this exact size of hole because the body would be a clearance size hole, and we want to have a hole the size that a fastener can fit into. So I can highlight all these holes and convert to reference figures, and now I have a center point on a reference figure that I can use to create a placement for the hole, right? This, if I wanted to, and you can use the hole wizard for this, which is a very effective way to do things. But I know I'd want my holes to be slightly smaller so that they can be tapped. So if I make all of these equal, and I give this a dimension, I can't remember what my holes were originally. Looks like they were 1/4 inch. So I can go down to 0.2, and then there's some meat to add threads in. So that's really cool. We'll just make this a tap hole. We'll deactivate, and then if I go to my left view, I'll choose extruded cut, and I'll choose my sketch, which is sketch 14. Back to the right view now, and I can choose a position that doesn't go all the way through the neck. Maybe right there. So I think we've added all the detail that we need to in our neck. Maybe one last, okay, as one last treat, because I'm really getting into this video today. Let's do one more. So, and I'll head on back to my neck. So if I close and open my neck, I now have the holes. And okay, one last thing. This should be a lot of fun. I'll choose this face right here, activate a sketch. And how about I choose sketch text? We'll go with sans serif. I'll add in, the channel name. Maybe a SNDWAY script. That's yeah, let's make this. How does 45 degrees look? We're getting there. That's cool, so we'll apply and close, right? And that seemed to work out pretty well. So from here, let's deactivate, extrude, something small, 1 thou. I'll edit that and reverse. And we've got a nice little logo up there. So I think we have more or less a complete neck. Let's save and close. And there it is, updated in the assembly. So I hope this video was helpful. If it was, please subscribe. We'll work on some more assembly components in the next video. I'll see you then.